Y ahora sí vamos al último panel de este gran evento de 2 días que se realizó aquí en Santiago de Chile, en la Universidad Andrés Bello. Las ponencias y diálogos de hoy muestran que son cientos de inversionistas en América Latina los que han asumido el compromiso de fortalecer sus prácticas, sus buenas prácticas de inversión responsable. Hay avances significativos y también insoslayables. Desde otra perspectiva está el movimiento ESG, que ha ganado particular fuerza en Estados Unidos y cuyo análisis quisimos también que fuera parte de este gran evento. Para abordar este fenómeno contaremos con 2 tremendos expositores. Ya conocieron a uno temprano, Nawad Al-Sadi, CEO de Kanata Advisors, y a Fanny Torá, especialista en finanzas sostenibles de Mazars. Aquí, sí, y Mabel, tengo Mabel, sí, pero no la tengo aquí. Mabel Weber, que viene perdón. Vice Inversiones, perdón, no estaba en no estaba aquí en mi guión. Así que los invito a pasar para armar este. Y modera María José Montero, socia de Amedis, que ella es directora de AGF Amedis Capital, que va a ser la moderadora de este evento. Entonces, Fanny, Nauer y Mabel. Perdón, Mabel. ¿Aló?
Hi, everybody. This panel is going to be in English. So we are going to be discussing. I'm very happy to be here today with Nawad, Fanny, Mabel, finishing this journey of discussing on topics that we all care about. I'm very happy to be with you and also to be with all this audience, people from all around, but people also from Chile. We are proud to have you all here, proud to listen your experience from abroad, proud to share our experience locally. And united by a topic that we all care. But I ask myself, what do we care about? And perhaps that's what we are going to go through during this panel. What do we all care about together? And I have some thoughts, some ideas that I want to share with you and take you to some questions. And I have an idea. Let me put you in perspective. What I think that we care about is that we care about making good investment decisions. We care about making good asset management. We care about investment. But how do we make good investment decisions? And let me put you in perspective. I have this idea that Jime Vial shared with me once, and I like it a lot, so I'm gonna talk about it. Jimena Vial just was in one panel today, and she comes from the impact investment movement in Chile. She said, well, investors have cared about return for many years, centuries, have cared about return. But it has been just the last century, at the beginning of last century, that we started to think about risk. And we start to think about what is risk? How can we manage risk? How can we compare it? And we became excellent on risk assessment. And now, in a way, we have this truth about the higher the risk, the higher the return. And this century, we start to include this, we started to integrate to this logic of investing and return, the idea on how we can include impact. How can we include social and environmental aspects in the decision-making, in the investment decision-making? And that's not easy. that's a process. So here we are at the beginning of this century, the same as the ones that were at the beginning of last century trying to understand risk. Well, we are trying to understand impact. And within that process, a movement arises, this anti-ESG movement. It sounds like, wow, risky, evil. No, what is that? And we want to go through that in this panel. What is anti-ESG movement? So we have people from the field, people from abroad, people from Chile, international people as well that are from all around. Funny, it's a Chilean that is from abroad. So very welcome. We want to start with this, knowing what is this anti-ESG movement, how you are facing it, and try to understand. Then we will go through the challenges, the benefits of this movement, and see how we're going to go through this in the future. So I have some advices here. Now what? I would like to start with you, because in order to have like two order debates, order ideas, concepts, could you please take us like to the reasons behind the rise of the anti-ESG movement, and if you could share with us your views on that.
Yeah, thank you, Marianne. Pleasure to be back again on the stage. I'm sure you all missed me. I think this is a great question, a great place to start. To me, the anti-ESG movement is actually a response or a reflection of the success of the ESG movement. Because if the ESG movement did not matter, there will not be anti-ESG movements against it. So to me, that's the first point that we have to keep in consideration, that we've reached a critical size, that there are people who want to push us back inside the box. So to me, I take this as you're, okay, they're telling me to speak louder. All right, so I take this as a good sign that there are people who are pushing against us, because that means we've reached a certain size, we've arrived. But the surge in this anti-ESG movement really started around 2019, 2020, 2021. Actually, it was in response to the surge in ESG flows in 2020. During this period, during the COVID years, people understood that the real world, the natural world, and the financial world are very connected. And there was a surge of interest in sustainable investing. And a lot of what sustainable investors were saying for a long time, that we have to think about the ecosystem. That pulled a lot of money into ESG funds. There was also a surge in a lot of global markets, because obviously there was a lot of capital that was printed. But it was in response to that we saw around in 2022 the pushback specifically in the US around ESG. They called it the ESG backlash, or the anti-ESG movement. And I would classify the anti-ESG movement into three groups. The first group is the political group. Those are people who view the ESG movement as a threat to their worldview. They don't want to hear about diversity and inclusion. They don't want to hear about managing climate. They don't want regulation around pollution. They're very either ultra liberals, or they are in the U.S. If you look at the U.S. economic system, political system, they're Republicans. They want the Republican side. Again, not everybody on the right is against, but it is ideological resistance to some of the notions that ESG stands for. So that's the first group. The second group is the industries that will lose from a sustainable transition. So there are fossil fuel industries potentially that feel threatened. There are industries that are polluting in many sectors, even in food, for example. There are certain companies that produce unhealthy food, heavy with salt, with sugar. Any industry that feels threatened by what the ESG movement is asking for around health of people and planet became the second group. And then there is the third group, which I call the ESG disillusioned. This group of anti-ESG people are people who believe the ESG movement has failed to deliver what we need to do in order to get the planet where it needs to go. And they believe this whole ESG movement is big greenwashing exercise. So they became vocal critics of it. They believe we need to change it, we need to eradicate it. And when I say there are three distinct groups, these groups, they feed on each other. So the group 3 may say something, is picked up by the first group, the middle group feeds the first group. So there is a cycle, but that's really the way I see it. And I think I'll stop here because I have 2 other panelists and we have many more questions.
Thank you. That's very interesting. And Fanny, from your experience, how is resistance to ESG manifesting in Latin America? Could you provide us like a view on how do you see it in the field? Are these investments seen as deviation from financial profitability, or do they provide a competitive advantage?
Thank you for the invitation. I'm very happy to participate to this panel of the elephant in the room on this Congress, and I'd like also to acknowledge the organizers to have the courage, I would say, to put it. I think, well, thank you also, Nawal, for having put like the explanation of what we are talking about. I think in Latin America so far, this movement did not have any big impact. It's under discussion because it comes from US. ESG investment started in Europe, and in Europe, it has not been politicized, which I think has been a great asset to allow a healthy development of sustainable investment to remain aside from politics. And I think, and we have this discussion, you and me in particular, for several years, there is a floor of confusion in the concepts that allow spaces for these groups to enter on criticism. And I think there are positive criticism that we should take into account, and maybe we can talk about it later. But first, I like to, again, clarify some concept that in Latin America and in Chile in particular, we still need to clarify what is ESG and what is not ESG. You talk about the third group. Yes, the third group maybe started to work in ESG investment because they thought they would change the world and save the planet and save the people. Okay, ESG investment is not about this. ESG investment is about profit, is about risk. You talked about risk. Yesterday we had Verónica de la Cerda, I guess, saying ESG risk is a risk. Maybe we do not need to talk about ESG risk. We just talk about risk. Climate change is a risk. We don't have to put it, in another place. And as every risk, it's not because you don't want to see that it does not exist. So you can say, I'm doing risk assessment, but I don't look at environmental risk. Okay, your problem, but environmental risks are there. And they will affect your business today, tomorrow, and after tomorrow, whether you want it or not. And they will affect your business, your profit, your return. Another thing is, and you are a specialist on this, so I took below your control, is looking for positive impact. And you have impact investment, you have social impact investment, environmental impact investment, you have investment flows from the US, from Europe, also here in Chile and Latin America, looking for projects that deliver profit and social positive impact, or profit and environmental and positive impact, all the three of them. But this is another thing. And so if we stop to confuse both things, we know what to expect from each one. And we stop to ask ESG investment to deliver positive environmental impact, for instance.
So impact investment is not ESG investment.
Impact investment is not ESG investment. And maybe just another precision, I think the confusion also comes because concepts can merge. When I do ESG investment, when I'm a company relying on talent retention, I have a lot of professionals that I need to retain. Maybe my way of retaining these people is creating social benefit for them. So maybe I'm creating social positive impact, but I'm doing it for retaining my people, And the way I design my strategy is to address it because it is a material issue for me, because I'm talking about my risk and my return. I don't, maybe it will sound hard, but I don't care about how people are. I care about retaining these people to work for me.
Exactly. It's a matter of expectation as well. Mabel, and what about you, given your experience on the asset managers industry, how are companies responding to this anti-ESG movement?
Oh, thank you. Thank you for the invitation. And we were discussing a lot with Tamara, that was supposed to be here, about the anti-ESG movement and how is the impact in Latin America, in investors and in companies. We've seen in investors first that there's still the most discussion is about profitability. We want to obtain profitability, and we want to do we wanted to integrate ESG factors as well, but at what cost? That's a thing that we haven't mentioned as well. That maybe this some people think this is too costly, and it will impact the profitability, not only because we will earn a lot of less profitability, but also that we will spend a lot more to doing so. But I believe there's this movement hasn't arrived in Latin America as the same as in the States, because we are in the earliest stages of scaling ESG. If we separate institutional investors that we are mainly here, the movement has been growing really fast. We were only like 20 signatories, 4 or 5 years ago from the PRR, and now we are 76. But this momentum is slowing. And we talk about products that, if we talk about a study that the CMF released, in April, I think, we only have 1% of AUM in ESG name products, and only a third of the asset managers that respond to the survey here in Chile say they integrate in 2022 the ESG concepts. So I think the movement hasn't arrived, that we are starting, but there's a lot of concern about cost and profitability. But when you talk about the companies, I think they're in much more like faster growth. Companies we seen yesterday, CMPC here, that they're talking about risk, and they are considering this at first with the investor relations, but then with sustainability departments that are focusing this, and they're growing. And I think it's because of the horizons of investments. Companies have a longer term of investment horizon, and asset managers, usually we try to win the year. So I think that's because we are in different stages of this path. But we are confident that this is the path to go. Institutional investors are looking more to Europe than to the US, but there's still a lot of wealth management that look to the US and question the cost and the profitability.
So it's changing. Let's move to benefits and challenges that this movement take us. Our landscape is changing now. Could you, given your experience, how do you think the anti-ESG movement is influencing global trends regarding, communication, cost? Mabel mentioned cost. Which main aspects, given your experience? Now, I think he has read everything regarding this. He's the EI of ESG movement. He really have read a lot. What's your experience, your view on this? How has the landscape changed with this anti-ESG movement?
That's another good question, Maria. So when we talk about anti-ESG right now, we're talking about it, I think, around financial institutions. But obviously, anti-ESG movement touches a lot of companies in a lot of sectors, although the concentration is around financial institutions if you look at the statistics. But there are, in terms of the way companies and industries are responding, is different, and it also depends on where they are. So we mentioned this is a largely a U.S. phenomena, and although we are in Chile and ESG and sustainability is European, we have to keep in mind, or started in Europe, at least the emphasis is more in Europe, 60% of capital markets are in the United States. So what happens in the U.S. does not stay in the U.S. So the companies, the way they're dealing with it around the world, the majority of companies, according to survey, 63%, are emphasizing the links between sustainability and value creation. So when the anti-ESG movement comes and say, well, why do you want diversity? Why do you want to manage your carbon? Why do you want to manage your water? They give them a business argument similar to the presentation I did earlier today. Another half are changing their communication. They don't say ESG, they say sustainability. They use other words. It's all ESG, but it's just different. They change the sign and now we're something else. But it is there. There's only a very small percentage that are pulling back on ESG, because any smart business person who's done their homework understand that there's value there. And the only thing I would say that is notable, there is less communication about ESG. So in 2021, 75% of companies that issued a sustainability report, there was about 75% of them that would issue a press release as well. In 2023, only 50% of the companies that issued a sustainability report issued as well a press release saying we have a sustainability report. And overall, 70% of companies are just talking less about it, and especially externally. So there was some impact. In one side, I would say it was positive in the sense that we need better emphasis on the profitability and ESG. And there is another benefit that you probably have not heard before, but something I perceived in the sense that the anti-ESG movement reduces the incentive for greenwashing. If you really don't believe in sustainability, why would you go and say all these things and then have to deal with all the backlash? So only the ones who believe in ESG and sustainability would go through that pain. So I think that's another benefit that the anti-ESG movement is serving us by actually weeding out the greenwashers.
Brilliant. And Mabel, we are seeing like the trends. These trends, are you seeing them in Chile? You have your focus in Chile, isn't it? And in terms of the evolution of ESG investments, are you seeing changes in strategies, in those communications from asset managers? Have you feel that change? I think United States is totally different what could happen in Chile, but how it has changed locally, and are there any other changes that you will raise on I feel on the positive and the negative aspects of it?
I think the main change has been that when we started this, everyone think about products. Like we have to have green products. We have to put the name ESG on it, or sustainable or green or whatever you can say. And we are moving slowly, we just started, into more to integrate. And this integration had the effect of like moving the whole company and not only the product area of the company into why we're doing this. And then you start talking about purpose, and that's when the process like flows. So we start moving from products to purpose, and that's the main. I think if you want this to work, you need to do that. People, I'm talking about as a managers. I think we're really concerned about greenwashing, and the regulators is as well really concerned about greenwashing. We want to do a lot of things. We want to put a lot of information there, but there's a lot of concern about what to say. So we need to say what we're doing. And that has been difficult, because in these panels, when people know what we're talking and know the ESG and the TCFD and everything, it's easy to talk. But we need to start talking, especially asset managers like the one I work with, they're in a bank, to retail people. We need to start teaching what the concepts are. And this problem about greenwashing and information, that has been a lot of, we spend a lot of time thinking about what to communicate and how communicate it. And we should be more focused on doing things, on investment than into communication. What changes there can be, I think, with the hands of more regulations, we will start like unifying, having a common ground, and then talking about, I don't know, a minimum standard, and hopefully this movement or the ESG impact in the investments continue.
You're talking about regulation. I would like to go through regulation and also about the anti-ESG resolutions, Nawar. But first, let's focus on regulation. What about you, Fanny? Let's see, like, how can regulation influence ESG practices and contribute to sustainable development? But also, how can we balance the greater cost that may come with regulation and the effectiveness of the growth of this movement? And Mabel and Nawar, please feel free to add up on that topic as well.
I really appreciated the collateral positive effect of anti-ESG on greenwashing backlash. I think it's very interesting. Regulation aims to support the development of here capital market for the SME, for instance, of companies, of countries, and also to protect some other regulators in general also aim to protect their people and their place and their territory. So you have environmental regulation, social regulation, financial regulation. I mean, each regulator is with his public, let's say. I'm French. I'm good at complaining on regulation, but I also love regulation. I think it is, and yesterday's panel also mentioned it, the balance between how regulation supports a development. It does not refrain a development because of cost associated, is very difficult to find for each regulator. But I also think be careful with the bad excuse of saying, this is a fault of the regulation, I mean, 10 years ago here in Chile, when I did start on this topic with the ALAS 20 team, by the way, we went to each and all pension funds to propose the value of ESG in corporation investment. They all said, very nice idea. The day the regulator will ask for us to do it, we'll do it. Bye-bye. Okay. 10 years after, the regulator did ask for it. And then now you can complain about how the regulator did ask for it, This is not, I know it's not only here, it's a general relationship between business and regulation, I would say. It's important that regulation is clear, is hopefully straight to the point, and hopefully the regulator has the capacity to supervise the application of it. It was also mentioned yesterday by Andrea, I guess, from Spain CIF. And I lost your second question.
No, that's fine. So we need regulation, but the thing is how much and which type of regulation. Any thoughts on that, Mabel, that you would like to add, or Nawar, in terms of the role of regulation?
We were talking about the role of us as managers to talk to the regulators and work with them, because we can wait until they send us this regulation, especially if we're already in this path. So we were talking in many associations how to help regulators and us to work together and make a regulation that works, that gives a common ground, that is simple and is cost effective.
Well, the only thing I will add to regulation, to me, the debate is not whether we should have regulation or not. It's really whether we have good or bad regulation. It's really about the quality of regulation. Regulation is not a panacea. There are very, very bad regulators out there and a lot of bad regulation. Regulation is not necessarily a good word, but we do need good regulation. If you think about the financial markets, prior to the 1930s, it was the Wild West. It was a casino with no rules. You didn't even know what the rules are. And a lot of people lost a lot of money because of insider trading and pump and dump and schemes. And the financial markets play a very critical role in financing the real economy. And that could only work with proper regulation and disclosure. But it took 80 years for these regulations to mature. And now we're trying to do a lot with sustainability in a few years, and we're trying to get it right, and that's very difficult. So we do need an active dialogue between the regulated and the regulator to make sure that we get to where we need to go in terms of what we're trying to accomplish. Because I think there are some people in the anti-ESG group who are against regulation, period. And you cannot argue, you cannot debate with these people because they have an ideological resistance. But if we want to get more people on board the ESG movement and the sustainability movement, we have to make sure that the regulation is manageable, is not too expensive, and they understand why it is there, what it's supposed to do. So designing real good regulation is very important.
Thank you very much. Now we're pretty clear, all of you. And so can we go to this anti-ESG resolution? I would love you to go deep a bit on that, perhaps to explain it. Not everybody knows about it.
Yeah, sure. So if you're familiar with shareholder resolutions, there are many companies who have to manage shareholder resolutions every year. That many of these resolutions are submitted by shareholders. Many of them are pro-ESG resolutions, but about 8% of shareholder resolutions are anti-ESG resolutions. It's basically a fund that submits a resolution that says we don't want any disclosure on carbon, we don't want any disclosure on the diversity policies. These are called anti-ESG resolutions. On average, pro-ESG resolutions receive 27% support. 27% of shareholders support pro-ESG resolutions. Does anybody want to guess what is the support for anti-ESG resolutions? All right, I'll give you a number. It's 2.5%. So it's a lot of noise and very little support. These are the hard numbers. You can find them every year. These data points are published. Anti-ESG resolutions never receive more than 3% support. So this is really why I think it's good we're having this conversation, because it's also contextualize how much noise there is and how much real support there is for all this anti-ESG movement.
We're running out of time, and I know that. And I need you to go to the future. A few words on that. And if we can go then to questions of the public. But the future, how do you think we could face it? And how could we can take the most of this anti-ESG movement as a force of good, as a force to take us further, not stepping back? And how do you see the ESG movement on the later years?
If you could,
I can start in a couple of words.
I think, well, when we talk about regulation, I think common taxonomy for asset managers would be great if it's self-regulated or regulated by the CMF. And also education and awareness. I think we are talking about here between institutional investors, but there's a lot of wealth management, retail investors that need to know this, and we have to spend a little more time training them. I don't know if they're the investment team, but someone, we all need to train them and train ourselves. The investment teams, we are trying to catch up this in some, as I said, the PRI, we're a lot more signatories, but we need to not only sign to be there, but also work to be there, and that is to change the process and train ourselves as well. In this sense, maybe a point of attention, and I remember Andrea from Spence's presentation yesterday, she mentioned studies saying that the profits you can gain from ESG investment comes if you have highly sophisticated investment policies and strategies. So maybe be careful to say, oh, I'll do a small stuff on ESG and I'll get some benefit. Oh, I don't get any benefit. Oh, I'm anti-ESG. This is not working, you know? If as an investor, you want to address this and incorporate this in your policy strategies of investment and get the benefit, and you have first to ask yourself why you are doing it. Are you looking for profit and return? Are you looking for creating positive values because maybe you have clients asking for this? Or are you looking for both? And depending on what you're answering here, you will invest the resources, the methodologies, the tools, the education capacities related to it. And so you will know what to expect in terms of results, and you will assess the results depending on this objective, okay? And maybe I think something that the entire ecosystem is working on is having more reliable ESG data, the information data stuff at the basis of the pyramid Nicolas said, reliable data, assurance on data, better data, more straight to the point, more related to business or to impact, but easier to understand and to assess and to take into account by the investors.
Thank you, Fanny. And for I would like you, Nawar, to add to your looking into the future. Perhaps you can give us like an idea of what inspires you to develop the concepts of II, FII, and PII. That is linked, isn't it?
Yeah. So one way to deal with this whole ESG, anti-ESG debate is there's a term I coined a couple of years ago called FII, which is full information investing, vis-a-vis PII, partial information investing. And I think that's the lens with which we should view ESG investing. What investors do best is find the best data and analyze and understand the implications of the data. And there's no investor that's going to tell you, I'm going to do more with less data. First, they want the data, analyze the data, understand what's material and not material, build investment strategies around it, and then hopefully deliver return. So to me, ESG investing is around getting access to as much data, quality data as you can, and then experimenting with that data, understanding the relationship between sustainability data and value creation, backtesting, engaging. So what we need to do is we need to make this data available, but we cannot legislate how this data will be used or should be used. This is up to investors to use the data. So I do think when somebody says, I don't want ESG data, they're basically saying, I want to invest with partial information. We want to invest with full information. So that's really, to me, I think what I'd like to leave our audience with. We're not going to talk about impact because that's a triple I, impact information, and that's another aspect. But if we just stay with mainstream and ESG, I think that's hopefully a healthy way for everyone to think about this debate and why I think the anti-ESG movement is ultimately anti-investor and not just anti-ESG.
Thank you very much. I think we have time for a couple of questions, don't we?
Thank you. Yes, I've been given permission to ask two quick questions. However, I think one of them relating to taxonomy was already covered by Mabel. So I will go to the longer question, the more open-ended question, because I think it's very interesting. would you or do you consider that the ESG, the anti-ESG movement or the ESG movement could be perceived as a menace to the status quo in regards to the regional location of corporate powers as we've known it so far? In regards to, for example, do petroleum producers and the companies that base their economies on that sector, like ESG and the decarbonization of economies? Could you look at ESG through a political lens and how it relates to the corporate powers and the ecosystem of economies? It's a very global, open-ended question. I think it's a long answer, but yeah.
I have a short thought on this. Whether there is an ESG movement or not, anyway, these companies will fall down in 20 years. So, I mean, they can anticipate it and innovate and change their, business model, or just don't do it. But I mean, it's not the messenger, the problem. It's the problem.
It's hard to tackle this question in a few minutes. So I suggest we stay here another 2 hours and debate exactly this question, sentence by sentence. But I think there are elements within this question that ties back to the way I classified the anti-ESG movement, specifically about the status quo. So yes, in a way, the push against ESG is by certain industries that want to preserve the status quo. The challenge is that there's nothing that is unchanging in the world or in the economy. So by repressing information, we end up exactly with what Fanny said, is ultimately reality is going to hit. There is a quote by Voltaire. He says, people argue, nature acts. And you have mountains and you have earthquakes, and nature acts, and we can talk about it. So this is more about there are short, I would say, limited interest by certain parties maybe. But having said that, and I think we tried to make this clear in the panel, not every anti-ESG argument is some kind of argument that comes from the wrong place. There are legitimate concerns. I worked in a lot of ESG departments. There are people who don't know what they're doing. And what I mean that is they mean well from a moral perspective, but they don't necessarily understand the investment applications. The anti-ESG movement is trying to say we need rigor, we need clarity, we need accountability, and it is good for any, I think, societal or economic or political exercise to have dissenters and observers and people that hold us accountable. And I think in part, because some of the anti-ESG movement is not genuine, but in part, the anti-ESG movement can ask as a check so we don't live in a bubble and don't see the mistakes we're making.
Right. Thank you very much. I think that's the end of the panel, all the time we have. So I invite you all to take the official picture.
Just to finish, thank you all the panelists. I don't know, Mabel, if you want to say something else. I just want to wrap up and say that I think that the anti-ESG movement we understand through this panel is not just bad things about it. We have a lot to learn. It's quite legitimate. The points raised are legitimate, and we can learn from that and take this movement further rather than backwards. We can make things better. We have the opportunity, but it's not a fact. It depends on how we settle it down, and we can make this opportunity a reality if we learn from what we are living. So I invite you all, all of us, to learn about that, to continue to create this movement, understanding that we are at the beginning of the century, the same as people working on risk on last century, and continue to work towards the sustainable investment ecosystem. So thank you very much, and good. Thank you for the organizers